the question is, how did you feel to see your childhood home go up in flames or destroyed?
Welcome to the Global Indian Podcast, the world's greatest journey and the official platform for people of Indian origin. Because let's face it, we are everywhere. Welcome back to The Voice. This is Season 2, Episode 1, Part 2 of an incredible 3-part series with none other than the remarkable individual Ela Gandhi. This podcast is hosted by our Global Indian Ambassador Rajesh Gopie in South Africa and is supported by our dear friends at shareme.com, the app for all your beauty, fitness and wellness needs. Now you already know who I am. You know my story and you know why we're doing this series. So what I'll do, let me run you through the second part of this conversation. In part 2, we're going to be looking at the issues surrounding racism, the riots that hit South Africa, and Ela Gandhi's time supporting none other than Nelson Mandela's fight for freedom, amongst other key conversations in this part. If you'd like to find out more about the Global Indian series, tune in until the end and I can give you some great details on how you can reach us, how you can also share your stories, and more importantly, where you can help shift the narratives. And if you haven't done so already, if you're listening to it on YouTube, make sure you subscribe and you follow the Ela Gandhi playlist. That way, the next episode comes up automatically at the end of this one. Or, if you're on Podbean, do the sensible thing. Subscribe anyway. It ensures that you never miss an episode and it automatically comes up on your device. I hope you thoroughly enjoyed this session.
And just move. Get up 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 and just.
So it's really interesting how that shaped your life, given how your life turned out as a social worker and an activist. But I'm gonna fast track you to 1985, when the Phoenix ashram was destroyed, partially or to some extent seriously damaged by the riots that took place. Now these were, people label it a lot of things, but it was largely Black on Indian riots that happened in 1985, and people like Dr. Dina Naidu wrote a wonderful short story about the burning of the ashram and so forth. Really were harrowing. And I know this is a touchy subject, but can we talk about your feelings about that ashram being destroyed?
Okay, just two things, just going back about the multiracial school that my mother started. It was in the building in which my grandfather used to live. We had rebuilt that building, called it Sarvodaya, and that's where my mother started a school. She just sent a word around to the people on the settlement that she would like to, teach any child that isn't admitted to a school. And she thought she would get about 10 or 15 children, but before long we had 300 children. Wow. And that's when the attention of the government was drawn to the place, and they closed it down within a year or so. So that was the story.
A multiracial student group, Blacks and Indians coming together to the same school, sitting together in the same rooms. Yeah.
And there was no problem because in Inanda everybody played together. And ate food together, and there was no distinction, and little children didn't see the difference, racial differences. People, even today, if you go to a primary school, the child doesn't see. You learn racialism over a period of time as you grow up from your parents, from the community, and so on. You're not born with racism. So children don't learn racism. They don't know about it. They learn it from communities. So, having said that, You know, in 1949, there was also a riot in South Africa. I mean, in Durban in particular.
Cater Manor, right?
African, yeah, Indo-African riot. And during that time, you know, a lot of the Indian people in the neighborhood came and sought shelter in our house because most of the African people in Inanda said that the one place that mustn't be touched is Phoenix Settlement. And they said that to all the people in Inanda that this is a place of God and we mustn't touch it. No, nobody. And they actually protected the place from any damage at that time. That was in 49. And those were old people who knew Phoenix, with whom we grew up. My father had contact with them. Some of them even remembered my grandfather. So those were old people who lived there. And this is what the old people had said at that time. Coming back to 1985, you know, that riot started as a result of the killing of Victoria Mtenge. If you remember, on the 1st of August, 1985, she was murdered brutally outside her house. She had just come home, and in front of her children, she was shot down. And in those days, there was this terrible violence that was happening in the country. And in Inanda, which was an eyesore for the government, that government, the apartheid government, because Inanda still continued to be multiracial. And in order to change that, they orchestrated this, you know, and it's not historically. There are other countries where people have orchestrated that kind of, you know, racist notions in the community to drive out other communities. So this is what they did. Instead of taking the responsibility themselves of driving the Indian people out, they got the community to do that. And that is how the riots started. And yes, Phoenix Settlement was burnt on the very last day of the riot. We usually didn't think that they would come to Phoenix. A lot of people living on Phoenix Settlement didn't think that they would come. I was personally, you know, there were African people who were housed, who were refugees from Lamontville and Amanati, who were living in the press building at Phoenix Settlement as refugees because they were being, you know, hounded in their homes. Their homes were burnt down and all that. And these were African people. So to consider the 1985 just simply as an Afro-Indian riot would be, you know, misrepresenting the fact. Because there were riots all over the country at that time. And yes, in Inanda, it took on that kind of, you know, image of it being African Indian riot. But there were African people living on the settlement at that time, and they actually helped the Indian settlers over there to move out, because on that Thursday night, I went there, and amongst the residents living there was Dorothy Nyembe. And Dorothy Nyembe is a very famous person in South Africa. She was a freedom fighter. She was arrested and imprisoned for almost 10 to 15 years. She served a sentence in South Africa, and she had been released, and her life was in danger. And so I went personally and I rescued her, and she came and stayed with me in Verulam at that time. That was on Thursday nights that I went to Phoenix Settlement. A lot of the settlers, the Indian settlers who were still there, some of them had moved out, but some of them were still there, and they came and asked me, so what do we do? Do we move out, or what should we do? And I told them, look, things are so fluid. I can't tell you stay on and nothing will happen, because we don't know. It's exactly like the COVID-19 situation now. We don't know what can happen, who can be infected, and how you get infected, because there are so many ways. Exactly the same situation in Phoenix Settlement, and I couldn't tell them, give them an assurance that they will be safe.
Elapen, the question is, how did you feel to see your childhood home go up in flames or destroyed? I mean, you, the person.
It was very, very painful. Extremely painful, because I was still hoping, although I told the residents that I can't give you all an assurance. To me, deep down in my mind, I felt that Phoenix was still going to be respected and people will not destroy Phoenix.
I mean, your little hands were in the...
People. Phoenix had a clinic which served the community over there. Doctors used to come there on a voluntary capacity to provide services to the Phoenix settlement, to the residents around there, and people knew that. And yet they burnt the place down and only protected the clinic. Didn't protect, well, I think it was beyond them to protect the rest of the buildings. And definitely the people who came and destroyed Phoenix settlement were not residents of Inanda. They were people from outside. Many people have said that they heard them speaking a foreign language. So we don't know who these people were. You know, not a proper inquiry has been held. And nobody, even though lots of stories have been written, nobody can actually say how this whole thing happened and who were the people who came and actually attacked. We know that the South African government and its armies were collaborating with dissidents in the neighboring countries. They had lots of, armed forces in the neighboring countries who were destabilizing Mozambique and destabilizing Angola and other countries, neighboring countries. And these were internal forces recruited by the South African government to do that. So we don't know whether they were used to come there and do what they did at Phoenix Settlement, but it was very painful.
Now, how did it change you as a person seeing that? Because it is a tragedy. Your family, yourself, you've always fought for equality. Then to see that happen there and then, especially at a place where you're bringing the communities together, that you're making a real sustainable difference. Did it change anything in you? Did it make you think slightly differently about things?
Well, the same as COVID-19 today, we are thinking differently. In those days, we also thought that fine, this has happened. What had actually happened at Phoenix is on the Friday, it was destroyed, burnt down. On Saturday, truckloads of people were brought in to Phoenix to build informal housing and occupy the 100 acres of land that belonged to Phoenix. So all that land was occupied by people. And once you have a whole community of people now living on Phoenix settlement, which was a given for us now, they had built houses, They were living there. How they came there, who brought them, is a different matter. They started living on the settlement. And we had to think differently in order to think, how are we going to work with these people? Because they were people. They were individuals. They had families. And we needed to work with them as families. So we needed to think about that. And that is what, from 1985 right until 2000, it's almost 15 years that it took us to build up a relationship with that community and to sign an accord with them that they will, move out of a section of the property, which would then become a historic heritage site, and move into the rest of the property so that we can rebuild the historic buildings and they could also have a land to live on. So we had to take that hard decision to give up the 100 acres of land, part of the 100 acres of land, and retain only a small portion where we could rebuild the heritage site.
Right.
So it's a decision that we had to come to. And it was a hard decision because, Gandhiji's idea was to have a settlement there of like-minded people, to draw in people to come in there and, carry the Gandhian message, carry the Tolstoyan ideal and live by it. Because it wasn't just about preaching, it was living an ideal. This is what Gandhiji's life was. And that's why he calls it experiments, because it is an experiment. It was an experiment for us to live those ideals. And to the end, he was experimenting. And to the end, that is what we are doing, experimenting to live those
So,
ideals.
Ben, can you hear me? Right.
Yes, I can.
We're 60 odd days into lockdown right now, but you've had a different kind of lockdown as well in your life as a freedom fighter, as an anti-apartheid struggle activist. You were under house arrest in different forms for a period of about 8 to 9 years.
Yes,
and that could be interesting.
Taking out Rajesh, but I think you are asking me to talk about the house arrest.
Yeah, you've been under house arrest for about 9. You were under house arrest for about 9 years in different forms, and there was a lot of hide and seek and all of that, trying to break lockdown, so to speak. Maybe you can share a little bit.
Okay, the difference between now and then is now we're doing it voluntarily. Voluntarily in order to avoid transmitting the virus and also getting the virus. So we are protecting others as well as protecting ourselves at the present moment. But in those days, it wasn't about protecting anyone. It was about an imposed, unjust legislation which imposed these restrictions on me. And to an extent, my family, my husband was also under house arrest at that time. And so it was imposition, which we were very much against. And so every opportunity we had, we would break it. Because that wasn't an imposition that we respected. It was an imposition that we had to endure.
Did you get into disguises to get out of the house, or how did you manage all of that to avoid the police, who I'm sure are watching the house, as we know they did?
Yeah, they did. Yeah, we did. We would I had different hairstyles at that time. See my photographs of that time, you'll see I would cut my hair, I would, perm it sometimes and all that sort of thing, and give myself a different look. So, yes, there were disguises at times. But
Ella, you sound like you were the Indian James Bond in South Africa.
yeah, there were many, not James Bond, but Scarlet Pimpernels. We used to call Mr. Mandela Scarlet Pimpernel. And we learned from him that, it is possible to get away with this. Even in our house in 1961, when the organizations were banned, but NIC wasn't banned. And we had a branch of NIC which used to meet in my flat in Durban. And we used to have visits from the leadership of NIC, like Dr. Andri, MD Naidu, and these people who used to come wearing overcoats and hats and dark spectacles and all those kinds of disguises. They would come and talk to the activists in our house. So yeah, it was a familiar thing for us. It was, being a Scarlet Pimpernel wasn't a new thing. Everyone did it, and we did it too. Yeah.
I have a question around, there were a lot of Indian activists, South African born Indian, of India, born here, who contributed to the struggle, yourself included, Dr. Dalu, Dr. Naika, and many, 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 many more. And many served in prison with Nelson Mandela and so forth. So they've been really important in the struggle, especially around, your dad included, around the creation of the Freedom Charter and a desire for a non-racial society. But presently, do you think that the contribution of these stalwarts have been honored in the new kind of politician that is emerging out of South Africa, especially around the notions of racial identity and who is South African and who isn't? In particular, I'm mentioning people like Mr. Malema, who was very vocal in his stance against Indians being included in important positions in government, etc. How do you feel about that?
What a nail-biter. Rajesh is doing a fantastic job. I'm sure you agree. So, if you'd like to listen to a third part, it is super easy to do. 2 ways to get it done. First, if you're on YouTube, go to Global Indian Series, type it in, you'll come across our stuff and hit subscribe. And then look for the Ela Gandhi playlist under the Global Indian podcasts. There you'll find episode 1, 2, and 3 of this 3-part series. Or if you're listening via Podbean, make sure you subscribe, because once you subscribe, it means that you can listen to all the latest shows and all the previous shows really easily as well. On there, it should automatically load up the 3rd installment. Now, the 3rd installment is remarkable, and I think is a conversation that every global Indian would want to listen to, especially what's taking place right now. We're entering a new sphere in 2020 where we're seeing statues of people being torn down. We're seeing a huge shift in identity politics and a new way and a new breed of politicians in that sense as well. In the 3rd final installment, with this remarkable conversation with Ela Gandhi, we plunge headfirst into these issues. We tackle them, we discuss them. It's something that you're going to want to listen to. If you like what we do, reach out to us. You can grab hold of us via social media on Instagram at the Nazrans, or via YouTube, which you can find the details on your platform of device. Until you hear my voice again, I hope all remains well. And if you listen to this 3-part series, make a comment. This is fantastic. I'm sure you agree. Speak to you soon. Bye for now.